This is Bloomberg Equality. I'm Caroline Hyde.
And I'm Romaine Bostick. Over the next few weeks, we're broadening our coverage of markets and the economy to take an all-inclusive look at what social equity and equality truly mean for companies, for investors, and ultimately for our collective global prosperity. We're going to go deep today into several key topics, including the impact of the elections in the U.S., the variance and nuance of equality initiatives around the rest of the world, and the corporate retreat from the diversity, equity, and inclusion groundswell from 4 years ago.
Today, Romaine, we start there. The retreat from DEI. It's been nearly 1 year since the U.S. Supreme Court ruled against the use of race-based affirmative action in college admissions. Since then, a push against DEI has spilled into corporate America, where the legal assault on diversity initiatives has actually gathered some steam. Just think billionaires and executives such as Bill Ackman, Elon Musk, launching their own public campaigns against DEI. As conservative groups, they've been ramping up some legal pressure. Now, a group led by Stephen Miller, former advisor to Donald Trump, has filed at least 15 lawsuits, sent over 30 letters to the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, arguing, look, that diversity goals have led to discriminatory treatment of white male employees. Now, as criticism grows, corporate America is going quiet on diversity. Just think, Google, Meta slashing DEI budgets, Zoom eliminating its DEI team entirely, Romaine.
Yeah, this has become a big issue, Caroline. You remember what things were like back in 2020 when so many corporations were announcing DEI initiatives and, more importantly, putting money behind it. But as you can see at the chart behind me right now, data from Forrester shows a significant drop-off in that. At around in 2022, we are right around 33%. But you can see that steadily decline into 2023, below 30, and now here in 2024, preliminary data to be sure, Caroline, but now potentially dropping below that 20% mark as well.
Look, the numbers don't lie. Let's talk about the data and the feeling. Ultimately, Bloomberg's Simone Foxman is here covering the topic extensively. And DEI in the workplace, we're right to think it's gone quiet. We're right to think the money's going and reducing. What are the arguments you're hearing that are best placed against having DEI in the workplace?
Well, it's frankly the idea that too much focus on race makes people angry and makes them unwilling to talk to people of a different race, of a different ethnic group, of a different religion. And so that's one of the key arguments against DEI. There's also the idea that companies may be going down in qualifications, in preparation, in aptitude, in order to pick someone who falls into a specific category. Now, proponents of DEI say that's not the case. Frankly, discrimination in the workplace is still the overwhelming way that they see the workplace. And therefore, you're just trying to find more black candidates, more women, more Hispanic candidates, and these programs are still hugely necessary, according to these advocates.
Is there any possibility that we could see any middle ground on this? Because anytime we talk about these topics, we're kind of at one extreme or another. The folks who are very pro these DEI initiatives and the folks like Bill Ackman that are using their big megaphones to shout it down.
Well, to be honest, Bill Ackman is focusing very much on DEI on campus, and DEI on campus is very different than DEI in the workplace. And proponents of DEI in the workplace, there's some trainings on unconscious bias and the like that, the folks against DEI say make workers feel guilty, but for the most part, DEI advocates will say, we're just trying to standardize hiring. We're doing like basic stuff to make sure everyone's getting a fair shot. Frankly, I'm just not seeing those voices that are sort of the more centrist voices on this issue come together to talk at all.
What about voices full stop? We were saying how it's gone quiet in corporate America, but actually has it? Is it just that they're talking less in press releases, they're talking less in their earnings statements, but they're still talking about it internally?
Yeah, when you talk to companies, and we do all the time, they say, no, we're still really committed to diversity and we're still really committed to our efforts. Maybe we've had to change them a little bit for the legal ramifications, but we really still care. The problem is, you stop talking about it. What does that mean? Does that mean that there is less desire to bring in diverse candidates? I think that's a big question mark. There are also continuing legal cases that really could have implications.
Well, let's talk about the legal cases, because a big part of this conversation right now isn't just about how companies and people feel, but it's also now about the law of the land. The Supreme Court, of course, striking down the affirmative action issues when it comes to universities, and the fear is that's going to trickle into corporate America. We got another Supreme Court decision just today, which I think is kind of showing the complexity of what's happening in the courts and maybe what folks want to do either in those corporations or in their organizations, and this time surrounding abortion. and access to abortion methods, including the pill. Now, they did uphold that ruling today, but there's still concerns here. We can see additional challenges.
Yeah, the Supreme Court essentially said the FDA does have the authority to regulate mifepristone, one of two abortion drugs that's really the one that's specifically for abortion. From corporate America's view, they want employees to stick around. And so they're willing, in many cases, to adopt new policies that will help employees stick around. I was looking at this poll by KFF this morning. Large firms over 5,000 people, 43% of them cover abortion in all or most circumstances, and another 30% in some limited circumstances. But what that means, do you provide travel benefits to employees who need to go out of state to go get an abortion? There's only about 7% that do that. Mm-hmm. This is putting the onus on companies to try and determine how much do we care about these issues and how much do we care about retaining our employees, how much do we think it's important to them.
Absolutely. Simone Foxman has been covering this topic for us here at Bloomberg. And with that focus on the Supreme Court's decision today, we look back to that historic decision just about 1 year ago at that same court that limited the use of affirmative action in college admissions. Corporate America has now found that target on its back as well. Executives really girding for future rulings that could curb corporate hiring practices, specifically those designed to increase employee diversity. We had a chance to catch up with Kenji Yoshino. He's the director of the Meltzer Center for Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging at NYU Law, and asked him about the implications for corporate DEI programs.
So there's a wide kind of avenue for rebranding or reframing the programs so that they work, almost as well or just as well. In some cases, potentially even better, right? So I don't want to minimize the harm that the decision created, but there are kind of ways in which to proceed forward.
Whether you want to talk about reverse discrimination suits or the ones that are a little bit more targeted towards these specific programs, are we going to get another Supreme Court case out of this, particularly one that specifically addresses corporate America?
Inevitably, yeah. So the thing that I said that we got a clear window into was that the Supreme Court chose between two competing ideas of discrimination. So these are the anti-classification view and the anti-subordination view. The anti-classification view says it is like pernicious to classify individuals on the basis of race, period. No matter what the purpose is, if you classify people on the basis of race, it teaches us to look at each other as members of racial groups, it balkanizes society, and so on and so forth. The anti-subordination view, with which I want to associate myself, says it's actually not classifications in and of themselves that are problematic, it's the end to which they are put. So obviously if you're using a classification to continue the subordination of, say, Jim Crow, that would be horrible. But if you're actually using the classification, as Harvard's affirmative action program was doing, in order to undo that long history of subordination, that's a different thing entirely. So Justice John Paul Stevens once said, to confuse, Jim Crow with affirmative action is to confuse a no trespassing sign with a welcome mat, because the goals of these programs are so different.
And it's, I guess the irony shouldn't be lost on anyone that we're talking about doing away with racial classifications in a country that was basically built on racial classifications. How do you sort of address inequalities in society if you don't even acknowledge that those classifications even exist?
Exactly right. So you see me trying to thread the needle here, because on the one hand, I want to say this embrace of the anti-classification view, which is what happened. For 40 years, we've had some version of the anti-subordination view. This kind of YOLO, Supreme Court has embraced the anti-classification view definitively. So now that it's embraced that, it's only a matter of time, again, I would say in the next 5 years, before it takes that over into the employment context, and then we will actually have to be dealing with exactly what Harvard and UNC did. But I also don't want to let go of this point of, this whole country was based on these kinds of racial classifications. Stacey Abrams is really fond of saying the thing that makes her want to spit is when people say diversity, equity, inclusion is un-American, because she said, what could be more American than the idea of trying to expand the ambit of who counts as part of we the people? We were a country that was framed and created by white property freed men. Over the course of history, whether that's through the Reconstruction Amendments and civil rights, we extended that to racial minorities. Over the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote, and first, second, third, fourth wave feminism, we extended that to women. The LGBT rights movement, post-Stonewall, we're in Pride Month now, the disability rights movement, Chicana rights movement. Her claim is that every step of the way, we've actually been able to expand who counts in this country, and that DEI is just the newest iteration of that effort. So there couldn't actually be anything more American, right, than this project of DEI in order to overcome exactly what you were saying about the history of subordination on which this country was built.
Our conversation previously with Kenji Yoshino of NYU. Now let's just discuss exactly these legal battles against DEI policies, what they're hoping to accomplish, what they have accomplished. Jonathan Butcher is with us, Senior Research Fellow in the Education Policy at the Heritage Foundation. Now, you have written extensively on the idea that programs aimed at promoting inclusion actually do the opposite. I take a key out of one of your blog posts. DEI does not appeal to our better natures, but accuses anyone who does not see racism everywhere of being racist. How does the legal challenges attack this, Jonathan?
Well, we have to support the Civil Rights Act and what it stands for, and that is that we must do away with racial preferences. Individuals should be treated based on their merit and hard work, not based on the color of their skin. And that is crucially what the Students for Fair Admissions decision represents. It represents that we are not a nation based on racial preferences. I would argue that our founding values have to do with recognizing individual behavior and decisions. And I think that we can establish the Civil Rights Act as a pillar of American law based on preserving that. DEI is doing the opposite.
Well, explain, I guess, how you address some of the issues here, Jonathan. I mean, some folks who have pursued these DEI programs, they specifically point back to the inequities and the inequalities in society. They've decided, for right or wrong, that this is the way to close that gap. If we don't use these programs as a way to address that, do you find that there's anything else there that can do it?
Well, I find that if you treat people based on the color of their skin according to some sort of ratio, you're undermining that individual's ability to demonstrate that they can perform whatever service or job that they've been hired for. We're looking for programs that can show that individuals are based on their choices, their merit, and their decisions. DEI programs are not really diverse. What they're really doing is showing racial preferences, especially in terms of college admissions. That is precisely what DEI offices on college campuses have been doing over the years. That's why they wrote amicus briefs opposing, right, the main argument in Students for Fair Admissions. They were trying to support what Harvard and UNC were trying to do. They were advocating for the idea that we can admit students based on skin color. I would add that there is extensive research showing that these racial preferences cause a mismatch between students and the institutions where they are admitted. It sets students up who are not prepared to succeed in highly selective institutions. When those students, though, are accepted into schools that match the background from the K-12 area where they have been prepared, they are highly successful. If you set them up with racial preferences to attend a school that they are not matched for, it will destroy their confidence. It will set them up for low performance once they are there, and that will kill their job prospects as well as any potential for graduate school later. Right. There's clear mismatch literature that represents this.
And yet, we're not seeing merit coming through on an even basis. And yet, because of disadvantages in the very basis of education at the very start, many that should be at some of the highest academic performing institutions aren't able to get there, just whether that be through financial issues, where the luck or good fortune has been bequeathed to them in early age. So how do you address that if we don't start to look at it from an affirmative action perspective? Where are you thinking allocation of capital could go? How do you ensure that the right people are eventually rising to the top, no matter what the color of their skin is?
Well, I agree with you that there's a problem in the education system, and I would argue that the best way to deal with this is to do away with zip code assignment. We should not be assigning students to what school they attend in the K-12 arena based on where they live. We should be allowing parents to make choices based on where their children go to school, based on their unique needs and what school is the best fit for those students. And those schools can then prepare students to be successful either in the workforce or in the college that they choose to attend.
Jonathan Butcher of the Heritage Foundation, We appreciate you joining, outline some of the focus that you have as to why DEI is perhaps not the right focus within corporate America. Coming up, we continue our own, view of the legal landscape for DEI. We're going to speak with the co-founder of Hello Alice, who battled it out in court. This is Bloomberg Equality.
This is Bloomberg Equality. Billionaire fund manager Bill Ackman has made himself one of the most vocal and deep-pocketed opponents of DEI, criticizing diversity offices at universities for not being open to all minority groups. The Pershing Square founder saying, quote, if you're an Asian student at Harvard, the DEI office is not there to help you. If you're a Jewish student at Harvard, the DEI office is not there to help you. Now, while Ackman loudly pushes back on the idea of DEI itself, companies have been quietly pairing their DEI practices as well, seeking to sidestep the culture war. Take a look at the Russell 3000 index of the largest publicly held companies in the U.S. and mentions of diversity and DEI in earnings conference calls. Well, that has drastically declined. Here's a look at how diversity became a controversial word in corporate America.
The Black Lives Matter movement really had a resurgence after the murder of George Floyd. We saw a really big impact on corporate America. Citigroup pledged $1 billion to help close the racial equity gap. Target and Walmart said they wanted to hire and promote 1 million Black workers by 2030.
There's still not parity for people of color in management or any of the top jobs. You can see 6% of top executives as Black in terms of the population of the United States. That should be 13%.
The U.S. Supreme Court sharply limiting the use of race as a factor in university admission.
The SCOTUS ruling really opened the floodgates of attacks against DEI policies. Last year, more than 20 states across the U.S. either considered or approved laws attacking DEI. Companies are worried that some of those hiring policies might now pose a legal threat.
Edward Bloom is a conservative activist. He was involved in the Harvard lawsuit. A group that he had created had been trying to get affirmative action banned for some time.
His latest target is a venture capital firm called the Fearless Fund.
We are not the focus here. We're really just the lawsuit.
People think affirmative action is just we're going to hire a Black guy instead of a white guy, or we're going to hire a woman instead of a man. What's really going on here is for the pool of people being hired to look like America.
One of the biggest worries for corporations is figuring out the way forward.
Now, let's just talk about that ruling in the case against the Fearless Fund, which was just mentioned in the previous report. Came in favor of affirmative action foe Edward Bloom. Now, the Federal Appeals Court is blocking the venture fund's grant contest for Black women entrepreneurs. But there is another firm who had a battle, and Hello Alice is a fintech startup offering grants to entrepreneurs from underrepresented groups. The suit was brought on by the America First Legal, with a judge recently actually dismissing the case. We had the chance to talk with Hello Alice co-founder and CEO Carolyn Rodz.
It impacted every part of our business. I think one of the things I'm so fortunate about, we advocate a lot for the small businesses in our community, that they have to be healthy, financially strong, and financially fit businesses. And it's something that we always ran our own business under that requirement. And I'm so grateful because it allowed us to bring in the very best legal counsel that we could bring in. When this came through, our company said we want to be on the right side of history. We're going to continue to fight and advocate for the things that we founded this company on, for equity and for inclusion and for opportunity for every entrepreneur. It has been a game changer for us, I think, in terms of how we run the business, how we make sure that we can continue to operate in the face of what I'll call a crisis, because it's a pretty major undertaking for a business to have to take that on in a lawsuit at this scale. But in the end, I think it's made us much stronger. We've been able to just strengthen our relationships with our partners, strengthen our relationship with our community of 1.5 million business owners who stepped up and really believe in what we do. I think we were able to walk the walk and push for these founders.
Can I ask about the partners? Because it wasn't just you that was focused on with the legal challenge, but it's progressive as well. And there's many a worry that at the moment
big corporations are not wanting to have to make and take a stand, and it's the smaller VCs or startups that are having to do the fighting for them. Is that something you feel like?
Our partners have been incredible for us. I think the reality is when you're a large corporation, there are a lot more cooks in the kitchen. A lot of people have opinions. There's a lot of concerns. There's much broader impact in terms of the decisions. The benefit of us being able to fight this fight is that we are a smaller business. We're very scrappy. We make decisions with a much smaller team, but to have the support of the best legal counsel in our country, to have the support of these major corporations stepping up and saying, how can we help you continue as a business and be the strongest business that you can be so that you can continue to do this, it's been a game changer for us. But I'm happy to fight the fight. It's a fight I believe in to my core. It's why I started this company in the first place. And we'll continue to fight the fight as long as they're out there.
But what does the future hold, particularly for these types of programs, grant programs, ones that specifically target disadvantaged groups? Can you still do that out in the open? I know legally you can still do, at least as a private company, you can still do that out in the open here. But is there maybe a bit of a retrenchment, not so much in the effort, but in the messaging?
I will say the effort is strong. Mm-hmm. I think legally there is question over, is it discriminatory or not? Is it a contract or not? We took a lot of care when we structured our grants programs to ensure that they were not contracts. These are awards. These are private dollars being allocated in ways that private corporations see fit, in the same way that we're able to give our philanthropic dollars anywhere that we choose. It's the beauty of our country and a freedom of us as U.S. citizens. Mm-hmm. And that's something that we want to work to maintain. All the research shows, again, if we keep on the path that we've been going on, it will be hundreds of years before we see these capital gaps close for Black and Latino founders.
Our conversation there with Alice CEO Carolyn Rodz. Coming up here on the program, our takeaways from today's episode and a look ahead to next week's program. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Equality. Look, the biggest takeaways from today's show is that factually, data-wise, DEI is going quieter. Mm-hmm. There are legal fights that can be won, like with Hello Alice, but ultimately, maybe the focus just cannot be as loud as it was previously.
It can't be as loud here, but you heard from Carolyn. They're still pushing forward. We also heard from Butcher over at the Heritage Institute saying that the legal challenges will probably still be coming as well. We will be continuing our special coverage throughout the entire month of June right here on Bloomberg Equality.
No, and a little bit earlier, we talked about how, for example, that ruling from the Supreme Court is allowing still access to the abortion pill. That'll be something we'll be looking at towards the end on the US election. But for next week, global equality gaps. We're going to focus on how equality differs around the world.
Yeah, please tune in. We'll be back then. From New York, this is Bloomberg.